science fiction versus fantasy monsters, plus dinosaurs, and even more. The Monster Professor returns once again.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, guys, you know what? I have such an incredible interview today. We are just going to dive right in. Here it is. My guest today is a returning guest. He is an author. He is a podcaster. He is the Monster Professor, Josh Woods. Hey, Josh, welcome back to the show, man.
Thank you so much for having me back on, Matt Davids. And, you know, we were just talking before recording started, but I wanted everybody to hear me brag on you. Your podcast is doing great, and you've got some fantastic guests on there. You even got Ninja 3 director, which kind of blew my mind because I'm a huge cult classic fan or a cult fan of that kind of thing. So congrats on the Dice Geeks podcast success.
Thanks, man. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to Mr. Furstenberg. He was, I don't know. I love all those movies too. I also talked to a canon film historian who is just amazing. It's just amazing who you can talk to, and it's just awesome. So thank you so much for the kind words about the podcast and that. And you know, you've been on the show. I think this is your 5th time on the show. Is that
oh my
right?
God, 5 times? Wow, every time is fun. So
okay, all right, yeah, and we have
yes every time.
All right, and then of course I've been on your podcast twice, and we always tend to go a little long and talk about all kinds of random monsters, which is why we are here today. So we have a lineup of some really interesting topics. If we get to them, this is going to be great. If we don't, I mean, it'll still be great. We'll just have fewer topics, I guess. But we were going to talk about like a fantasy versus sci-fi monsters, and then maybe the classic monsters versus kind of some of the newer modern kind of monsters. But first, this is something we were slated to talk about on your podcast, but we just never even got to it because I think we rambled on about minotaurs or something. But dinosaurs as monsters. Now, it's not a huge shock to say, like that dinosaurs have like fascinated our imagination since, I guess, like day one, as soon as the first one was like dug up, or at least in our culture here, right? My kids are fascinated with dinosaurs. I love dinosaurs, right? Like I can't resist dinosaurs. So I'm just wondering though, since we have such a fascination with them, of course they would be great monsters, but what do you think? It's too big of a question to ask why we're fascinated with them, but because I think it's almost, I'm going to say this and it'll sound weird at first, but they're awesome, right? And I mean that in the real sense of the word, right? That they inspire awe because they are something that are just so mysterious to us, but they were here and they were real and they look like they would have been majestic beasts. Do you think that's kind of right on base why we're kind of fascinated with them?
Yeah, it might be something like that. And like your kids and yourself at some point, I grew up absolutely fascinated with dinosaurs. When where I was living, where I first, developed my awareness that I was living, those early years, I don't know, what is that, 3 or something like that, you start to become conscious. Mm-hmm. I was living out in Colorado where there's a bunch of paleontology going on all around. In fact, not too far from Dinosaur, Colorado. And, as a kids like dinosaurs anyway, but you get these big dinosaur museums to go to live paleontological dig sites, something like that. And so it was just a real live thing around me. Like dinosaurs were realer to me than elephants, because I saw dinosaurs everywhere. And so I was, it's so absolutely fascinated. I knew I was going to do that when I grew up. I don't know what that was now at this point, but something about dinosaurs. And I guess I am right now, aren't I? I'm talking about
You're
dinosaurs.
talking about dinosaurs.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
But there's something absolutely fascinating about them. And this idea of dinosaurs as monsters is cool. I like how I don't know how hooking these categories are for so many people. Like my students are just absolutely obsessed with these ideas, like whether something can fit some odd category. Like you get a whole room full of people, and you say, so, well, they start it always, but like, are hot dogs sandwiches? And then they'll just get furious, and it turns into civil war. Like half the class is split, or like, is the ocean soup? It's just food floating around in water, right? So dinosaurs as monsters, I bet you will, if you throw that question out there, you're going to get all sorts of heated debate on this thing.
Yeah.
And I think they kind of fit in this the way I see these other beings that like in stories or in games you see as the other. I think they would fit in that category that's kind of the bridge between, say, mundane human otherness, like killers or kind of soulless people, or nearly monstrous villains, and then just full on monsters like dragons and vampires. I think there's this middle category of unnatural beast. And of course, well, I don't know if it's still a matter of debate about whether or not dinosaurs existed or anything. I'm just going to go with they did, because they always did for me. It wasn't until I grew up did I find out that some people like disbelieved in the existence of dinosaurs or something. So they were actually gigantic, horrifying, but natural beasts. But if they appear in your life, something went wrong. You're not supposed to still be around, right?
Yeah.
And so and I think there's that whole category of like of a beast that is somehow broken out of their place in nature. And I think that can be like either they're breaking out of how they act in the natural cycle, or they are when and where they shouldn't be. And so, like in Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park, you're having to deal with carnivorous dinosaurs. They shouldn't be there because this was not the time. Or I mean, I think Jaws, the Bruce the shark or whatever in Peter Benchley's Jaws, like he's unnaturally ferocious, unnaturally canny. Or even like Daphne du Maurier's The Birds, where you have like these armies of like zombie-like birds just waiting for nightfall, and then they all attack. I don't know. You could say, well, birds and sharks and even dinosaurs are all natural creatures, but once they start acting unnaturally, I think they're just one step away from full monster. So I don't know if that's an answer to dinosaurs as monsters or their awesomeness, but that's one idea at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought that your point there about them kind of being outside of their time or outside of their place is an interesting thought. And because, we're happy, I think, to dig up dinosaur bones and to, try to piece them together and see them in museums. But then, of course, there is this pull, though, right? Just for natural curiosity, just to want to be able to see them, what they were actually like when they were alive. But that does then bring in kind of the idea that it's just like, well, if there is a T-Rex, in my backyard, there is a problem, right? Like there is a big problem. And, he may not eat me, but something, has gone terribly wrong, and he possibly could eat me. Right. So it has like a couple of elements, right there. So I think that's interesting, but I think, there was something with dinosaurs obviously just fascinating us kind of right from the start, because of course we had some of the, the stories of like, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, right? The Lost World, like these lost valleys with where dinosaurs were still, living, or I can't remember if they were in Tarzan or not, but I mean, you just throw some in. Why not? Because Tarzan lived in a fantasy place, right on top of the escarpment or whatever.
Or King Kong too. Skull Island.
Yeah, King Kong and Skull Island, right? I mean, that is, is so huge, right, in our imaginations, right? This idea that here's King Kong, and then we also have, dinosaurs living on this lost island. So it really took up in fiction really quickly, and also movies, with being, King Kong in 1933, that we have kind of wanted to discover them living. And then if we do, things go terribly wrong, right? Like none of those stories really are just like, hey, we discovered dinosaurs and now we're world famous and the dinosaurs are happy and we're happy and wealthy. It's always, oh, we discovered them and we killed them. Oh, we probably shouldn't have done that. Or they just devoured a whole bunch of people and now they're loose and we probably shouldn't have let that happen either,
Yeah, and I'm thinking back, with King Kong, and the dinosaurs getting out. I think there was a movie, was it like Beast from 30,000 Leagues or something like that? I think it was before King Kong. I think Ray Harryhausen worked on it, where like they were doing these nuclear weapon tests or something.
Yeah. That's the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. That was from 52, I believe.
Oh, 52. Okay, so way off from way after. But anyway, wasn't that like they were setting off nuclear weapons, and then the giant dinosaur comes up and attacks us? So I guess it was pre-Godzilla though, or wasn't it? Or maybe
I think it was
before Godzilla.
Yeah, a year or two before. I think it was around 52, 53. Because it was based on a Ray Bradbury short story, and they were testing. I forget I think it was a nuclear device or a bomb or something in the Arctic, and they woke up the creature, right? So they cracked the ice and woke up the creature, and that's kind of really one of those movies where it kind of fits the formula, what became kind of a formula. It's like man accidentally reawakens something from a prehistoric time. It has no idea how to, adapt and live in our world. So it just starts eating people and destroying things. And so we have to kill it. And then we're like, oh my gosh, we had to kill this thing that's priceless, this priceless life that, could have been interesting, but, we had to kill it or whatever. So that movie is great. I think it's is it the roller coaster? I think it's the roller coaster. Is it Coney Island, where he attacks the roller coaster and they have to go up and deliver an isotope or something into the beast and kill it. And a sniper. Is there a sniper? I think there is. Man, I need to watch that movie again. But I'm doing this kind of on the fly. So there's that. But that was a really good one. And of course, I think it was Ray Bradbury and Ray Harryhausen, of course, who met at like a science fiction club, and they said when they were like 17, 18 years old, and they were getting ready to go into World War II, they kind of made a pact, and they said, we're going to keep loving dinosaurs, even when we grow up. And so that was based on one of his short stories that was a dinosaur. And then, of course, Ray Harryhausen did the amazing stop motion effects for it. So we do have this pattern, though. There is kind of that pattern, at least in modern day kind of world, right? We see we accidentally wake up the creature, then we have to kill it, and then we're sorry we had to kill it. But so that seems to have become kind of a dinosaur or a prehistoric monster kind of formula, I think.
Yeah, and I think, and you're right. As soon as it wakes up, what does it want to do? Is just destroy everything and kill us and punish us. But you're right; it does fit that formula, and I think it's fundamentally horror structure formula in that there's this other thing, this with a capital O, the other, this, whether it's a monster or a killer or something bad. But why isn't it constantly trying to eat you every day of your life? It's because there's some sort of threshold there, and something that the potential victims do, or something humanity does, kind of breaks the seal. And normally that involves, not normally, but quite often it involves implication, as in we've crossed a boundary we ought not to have crossed, and then we have let the thing inside. And that's all the way down to like a microscopic moment where you invite the vampire into your home, all the way to you're doing something you ought not do, like play with splitting an atom, or playing with modifying genes, and you think you're going to be in control of mere humanity. Oh no, the nature or the universe itself strikes back by sending the other across that threshold you've broken. And I think that so often fits with many of the dinosaur kind of stories that I know of. But that can be anything too. It could be a mutant crocodile. It can be any sort of. It could be well, hell, even the Ghost in the Darkness story, even the actual historical Ghost in the Lions of Saba was something like the imperialists were coming in and constructing and building in a land that was sacred to these shaman spirits. And now these unnatural beasts you've crossed the line, so now they're going to punish you. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what's going on in so many of those, from Jurassic Park on back.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, obviously, Jurassic Park is almost explicitly that, right? That it's this like, why, okay, so you have a lot of technology, but why did you combine DNA with this to make like the ultimate predator? Like, why couldn't you just make some herbivores or something?
It's playing God. I mean, like there's the original Greek moral precept inscribed in the Oracle of Delphi, that temple in Nathi Seton, which is often translated of like know thyself, but at least, several scholars, and I think perhaps they know what they're talking about. I'm just reporting what they've told me. Tell me that a more in context translation is something like know your place, as I think we'd say now, something like stay in your lane. As in you're just a mortal, do not try to be a god. And what do so many of those stories entail? Something like humans are playing with godlike powers and get eaten for it.
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking too, but a lot of even kind of the older stories where, they weren't thinking about DNA and things like that, but they were talking about like a hidden valley or a lost plateau or something. There was kind of the idea, even in those stories, that was like, we shouldn't have come here, right? Like, or Skull Island, right? I think even somebody says that. It's just like, we should have never came here. We should have just not come here and just let it go. But we came here and we wrecked it all, right? That usually seems to be kind of a theme. And I think we've talked about it at length in some other episodes. We talked about Frankenstein. And of course, I think after Frankenstein, that is one of the themes that just kind of just permeates kind of this I don't know if you'd call it science fiction or a bit of fantasy, kind of mixing in, technology with monsters. I mean, that's kind of just always been there. It's just, at least since Frankenstein, right? That it's just probably shouldn't have crossed this line, right? Hey, buddy, don't cross this line, right? What were we thinking?
I think it's as old as the Garden of Eden story in Genesis. Here's the line that you shall not cross. Don't eat this fruit. But what is that fruit? It's the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. This wisdom or knowledge that you aren't meant to pursue, things you aren't meant to know. And then, of course, we cross that line, and then a whole a hailstorm of a firestorm of troubles ensues, and it also involved that unnatural being kind of sliding in there, the serpent, and I think that's as old as time itself, or as not as time itself. Maybe, I don't freaking know. It's very old, and
Sure.
and I think you're right in connecting. Like, not only does playing with godlike powers kind of entail that crossing the line, but exploring or trying to find out what you should not. It's an idea I like to call like a trespass into hell. Like you're exploring some place that you just should have stayed out of. Ignorance is the wiser path, I think, as horror stories teach us. Yes. I don't think the quest stories teach us where you're supposed to go, boldly go where no one has gone before and find out as much as you can. But at horror stories, I think, teach us otherwise, which is just stay humble, keep your head down, don't find out more than you. A wise man sees as much as he ought, not as much as he can.
Yeah, absolutely. No, those were some great points. Yeah, I think there's definitely, I mean, we see that kind of tension all the time, right? That there's looking into things, and there's pursuing knowledge, and then there's the line, right? There's the crossover point, right? Well, in Lord of the Rings, right? Sauron crosses the line, right? He's looking into the ring. He's looking into it. Why? To destroy it. So he's looking deep into the history, but then all of a sudden, he crosses a certain line at some point, right? And I think the line is what just like the dwarves, he delved too deep into kind of the enemy's ways, or the evil, Sauron's ways, and he crossed the line. And it doesn't become destroying the ring anymore. It becomes, I will become the Dark Lord, right? So there was this crossing a line. That is just interesting. I don't know how this relates to dinosaurs now. We're really we're really kind of far away. But in a D&D world, say like it's an interesting idea, because obviously there is a campaign setting, Tomb of Annihilation, where you're in a jungle, and they just put dinosaurs in the jungle, right? Because, well, yeah, you just put dinosaurs in D&D, and it kind of makes sense. But I think there are some interesting ways that people could play with kind of dinosaurs in some of the context that we're talking about. Kind of the, if you're running like a Victorian game, you could definitely go to a Lost Valley and find dinosaurs, or Skull Island in the 30s, or obviously modern day, you could just do Jurassic Park, right? you could just do the DNA, and we're recreating dinosaurs. Have you ever used dinosaurs in a game, or have you ever thought about it, or is there some idea you think would be cool?
I'm trying to think back on it. I think in those traditional I don't remember if I actually ever did or not, but I definitely like the Victorian era, because I used to run one of those kind of like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen's style games for a while, and that would have definitely fit. Oh, yeah. But I think even in traditional settings, there's almost always somewhere on the map that's the prehistoric area, or the barbarians, or dinosaur hunters, or these kinds of things. And I think that's cool, but something that always fascinated, I think an untapped resource are the Ice Age beings, which scare me a lot more than dinosaurs. Actually, when you see like the size of these sloths and these tigers, and last I heard, they are seriously working on, or have probably already completed, bringing back the mammoth and the American lion in science, and they're going to release them like somewhere in Oklahoma or Kansas, where they used to roam. Like, don't get out of your car if you're driving through Kansas anymore, because you might just very well encounter the American lion. And this thing was freaking huge. Like these sloths, these cave bears. Yeah. And I don't see, like, I kept waiting for the Jurassic Park version of Ice Age creatures, and the closest we got is like the Ice Age animation, which is not scary.
Wasn't there a movie 10,000 BC or something that like bombed, but it was like saber-tooth tigers and stuff?
Yeah, I didn't watch that. Should
Yeah, I haven't
Do you
seen
know?
that one.
I don't
I
think
haven't.
anybody else
I think
recommended.
very
I
few
don't know.
people did. That was kind of the problem. But it probably wasn't based on the creatures, because the creatures are incredible. I think you're absolutely right. Some of these, like cave bears that were like, weren't they like 14 feet?
Yeah, they were
Or
freaking
16
humongous.
feet or something, and you're just like, no. I'll take a stegosaurus over that, right? Like,
hell yeah. Yeah. And I mean, these, at least with the dinosaurs, they would seem like there's something about them just seems like they would be baffled by whatever's going on. Like even Jeff Goldblum can kind of distract one with a road flare. But like an American lion, his shoulders are as tall as your head, and you got a freaking lion coming at you that can run like that. Okay, why do these impalas, or not impalas, these, what are those? The antelope-like things in America out west.
Oh yeah.
And they're just like you just drive through the desert and you see all of a sudden there'd be like this herd of 2,000. And I don't know how that happens, but I swear to God, I just see these things. But how can they run so fast? They run so much faster than any predator in North America. Like, so why would they have evolved to do that? That doesn't make sense until you go back and find the American lion. If you look at what its estimations are on its speed, and it can run as fast as as one of these antelope things. And so you've got this thing running at like highway-like speeds after you. That's this gigantic, and it's trained to hunt down mammals. And apparently human beings had to contend with this thing. So it already knows that it wants to eat something that's shaped like you. It's so much scarier to me than a raptor or something.
Yeah. You are right. The Ice Age kind of animals they're intimidating, right? The saber-toothed tiger, and oh my gosh, you can just go down the list. The sloths, like sloths that were like as tall as buildings. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, they do not look like sloths that you see in memes or something like that. Like they might as well just be alien claw-armed bears or something. They look horrendous.
Yeah, hopefully you could outrun them though. If they were fast, then we're all in trouble, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they were fast. I really don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody does, but I think hopefully they were slow. But oh yeah, I don't know. I think there's so many ways to go with gaming like this, and I think too that I think there have been some settings that have tried to do some of the Ice Age stuff and some of the dinosaur stuff. But yeah. There's a lot of places you can go, and especially if you're doing like a Jurassic Park game or something, you can definitely get into kind of that. You can add a little extra dimension to your game, saying like, why did these scientists do this? Like why did we cross this line? And I think that would be an interesting kind of thing to throw into a game, because I don't know. Oh gosh. I know. Yeah. Sorry.
I was going to say about the implication thing. Mm-hmm. I think, and you're much more in on the current gaming world than I am. I'm kind of like I'm a retired gamer. I don't really know. I don't really do it much anymore. But there seems to be now this kind of trying to. A lot of people, at least now in America, want to be gamers or want to play, but feel like this colonial guilt, as if are we just the bad people, kind of breaking into this poor goblin den and killing them all and taking their gold, or is this all just colonialism replaying itself out on our kitchen table? Are we bad racists or something like that? Like, what's going on? And I think, if nothing else, it's this recognition that there is this kind of implication, crossing the line thing, and being an adventurer or a dungeon delver kind of stuff, and you can a couple different ways to go with that I've seen cool games do. And one is just embrace it, say you're a rascal, and adventurers are essentially kind of weird thieves that are pirate-like things. And so go in there and you're kind of the bad thing. You're just trying to survive and get what you can. And another one, which is it's more horror driven, as in you're just the victim of these things. Of course, the problem there is how do you push it forward rather than just run away or lock the door kind of thing. So those are interesting dynamics to play with. I think in a game is thinking, where in the scale of implication do your players lie, and then how can you play with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, and I've seen games that do that, kind of the flip the dungeon on its head kind of thing, and frankly, I don't understand them because I had always viewed like the goblins and orcs and ogres as, they are soulless corruptions of the good that have been created by evil wizards, right? Like that was the whole idea, or at least my understanding, my limited understanding of like Tolkien and some of the source material is just like these aren't other beings with souls, and the little goblin guy who burns down, whatever his name is, Tog, who burns down the little village, just goes home to his wife and kids at the evening or something like that. That doesn't happen, right? Like he has a little briefcase that he leaves in the morning to go burn down a human village or something.
I like that though.
Yeah, that's actually pretty funny. Maybe we could do something with that. Either the goblins off to work day or something. He's take your daughter to work day for goblins. I don't know what that would look like.
Yeah, I'm in. I would totally buy that one.
Okay, so something like that I would be for, but like normally it's just like they're soulless beings that were created by evil magic, and they're corruptions of life, right? They imitate life, but they don't actually have it themselves. And in addition to that, they have stolen all of these things, right? Like they didn't build the dungeon. They like came in, killed all the people that lived there, and then took it over and stole all this stuff from people like 1,000 years ago. And so that's the way I've always kind of viewed it. But I may, now that we're talking, I may write up goblin, take your daughter to work day or something. I may dash that off and publish that before somebody else does, because that's pretty good. But that's the way I've kind of always viewed it. And so I don't really understand some of the, kind of like maybe like is it World of Warcraft? I'm not the biggest World of Warcraft guy, but making orcs a full-fledged, just tribal people that are coming into conflict with, other people. Well, then yes, then you invite all of those kind of comparisons, right? You invite, is the war just? Is it unjust? And all kinds of things like that. You kind of bring all of those things up. So I've kind of always viewed it as they're soulless constructs of evil magic that are kind of imitating life and in a corrupt form, and aren't real things, right? And also you could look at it cynically, right? They're plot devices, right? They are a plot device, and they have no backgrounds or souls or anything like that, and they stand in your way, so you have to use all your cool spell slots before you fight the big one of the undead ogre that's standing in front of the chest with the cool magic ring in it that your character needs. And so they're plot devices, right? So it's just another way, I don't know, to look at it. I did think of something, and this is a random movie that nobody's going to get. I don't even know if you'll get this reference, but you like crazy old movies. So early 80s, You're the Hunter from the Future. Do you know that one?
You're the Hunter from the Future. No, I don't think I've seen that one. Thank you. I think you outgeeked me.
Okay, or misspent my youth is usually how it's classed. You're Hunter from the Future. I can't say it's good, but my goodness, it was an Italian production, I believe. And it was like, okay, we need Conan and we need Star Wars. So let's get these together, and we'll throw in some dinosaurs, and then we'll have Star Wars at the end, and it is madness. And if you go on to, I don't know if it's probably not streaming anywhere, but if you go onto YouTube, there are some definite clips, and prepare yourself if you have not seen any clips from this movie. It is out of control. But I do remember when I was a kid and watching my Saturday morning cartoons or after school cartoons, watching Voltron. The trailer of it played on TV, like on Channel 11 here in the St. Louis area. So this movie went to theaters in the United States of America, and you can't even believe it. Like you just can't even believe some of the stuff.
That's going on the watch list. Definitely. Your Hunter from the Future.
Yeah.
And I was just looking up images while you were describing it. He does not look from the future at all. Just like a loincloth in the LA desert, or the desert outside of LA or something.
Oh, I think it's in Italy. I think it's in
you said Italian, didn't you?
Yeah,
okay.
I think so it's outside of Rome or somewhere. I don't know what the word, but it's pretty madness. It is. You just can't even believe it was made, but it actually played in theaters here in America. So if anybody wants to see some dinosaur action with a big blonde barbarian guy and then it ends with like almost a direct ripoff of Star Wars at the end, hey, there you go.
I think I'm in. I think I'm going to enjoy this. Okay, I'm in. And I think that's, if there's something about that, like that caveman with that barbarian mix with it's just like dinosaurs, and you're playing with them in role playing games and campaigns and stuff. I think they fit that prehistoric vibe that caveman like barbarians all need to be into, even maybe more like indigenous tribal people style. I think you're right in kind of establishing the morals of dinosaurs in your world, or if you don't establish that as a GM, I think that's something that then the mystery of it needs to be a feature too. So either figure it out or make the mystery a key feature, which is where in the moral implication, kind of right and wrong side, does everything lie, and kind of your decision to go with that Tolkien approach of making these orcs and goblins kind of corruptions of what is real, and everything they have is stolen, not created. Like, that's good. And now we can move forward and play in stories with that. If you're going to go that World of Warcraft area, that's cool too, but figure that out. But there's something about like playing with dinosaurs and as monsters in campaigns, and even playing with that idea of sorting out the morals of your story world or universe, that I guess I'm curious about your opinion on this, because one thing that just always didn't quite sit right with me on dinosaurs in the D&D campaign, but I think a lot of the monsters in general, as much as I love the Monstrous Manual and seeing this whole catalog of the monsters and all their details, when I get in there as a player, knowing exactly what this monster is, or knowing that I know something about this type of monster, kind of killed it for me. And I think that might be one beginning distinction between the fantasy and the sci-fi or alien monsters, is something like, if I don't know all the rules and stats and weaknesses of this thing I'm facing, if it's something I can't even figure out what category it is exactly, then I'm facing a real monster. And I'm much more freaked out as a player and intrigued as a player than just seeing a T-Rex and I kind of already know what a T-Rex is going to do or not going to do. And it's just kind of an obstacle, it's missing that mystery and that darker danger for me. So I'm curious if you found that as a GM, or if you think about that as like not letting the players really know what it is they're up against, even when they're up against it.
Yeah, and listen to Josh over here pulling off the smooth segue into fantasy versus sci-fi monsters. But yeah, and now when I was really young and like playing D&D by like no rules, and then having no one to play with for large stretches, of course I would read the monster manual, or I'd pick it up in a store or something and flip through it. And I would just read the monsters and then just like dream about like ever fighting them or using them in play or whatever. Cause we hardly
same here.
Yeah, no kidding. And so we hardly ever got to play. And when you did, it was like, you were, we did all the stupid stuff of like trying to have our players meet and trust each other and all that garbage instead of just being like, each other, let's move on. And
like time's up and you haven't even left the damn tavern yet.
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody, oh no, Greg's mom's here. And it's like, we're still in the tavern and nobody trusts each other still. Oh my gosh. Why did we spend so much of our lives doing that? But yeah, we did. And so, I think, not knowing about the monster, I think it does. I don't know. You can go, I think personally not knowing kind of makes it, more, kind of like, scarier, but there can be that enjoyment though, of when, the dungeon master says that name of that creature, and maybe you have read about it and you know about it and you're just like, yes, like, oh, I've been wanting to fight one of these for years, and so you can kind of look at it that way, too, that it's just like, it could increase the excitement factor of being able to face something like that, but it could also kind of take out the mystery and dread kind of feeling as well, if that kind of makes any sense. But
it's like big game hunting, I guess, when you're like, yes, I finally found found a lich I've been going after or something.
Yeah. Well, there is something to kind of like the big game hunting aspect, right? There's the and of course that's been done with dinosaurs and stuff as well, right? Like you're just like, well, I've only seen pictures of this endangered rhino species and now I get to shoot one or whatever. But like, it is kind of just the thrill. I guess that would almost be kind of the thrill of you finally get to meet one kind of thing. And then the other one, the other kind of side of that coin is you're just like, what on earth am I dealing with? Right. Like, I don't even have a framework for what I'm dealing with here. And so I think there is kind of aspects to that. I think that can be, I don't know, maybe it can be the same way when you find out how, when you're a kid and you find out how some kind of movie tricks are pulled off, some movie special effects are pulled off and it, and you can kind of think, some people say, oh, well, that pulls out some of the magic of it. And other people are like, oh, I like it more now that, I figured out, that it's like they used a tennis shoe gum and some corn syrup and they made a spaceship or something. And you're just like, that was amazing. Like, how do they do that? Yeah,
you're right. You're right about that. But I guess I'm most fascinated when I'm able to wonder both, like when I'm getting to appreciate like the behind the curtain mechanics of it, but I'm also constantly like watching for what's real or not. Like in a movie, a sci-fi or special effects and stunts in movies, that's a great example. Like as I learned more about practical effects and real stunts, and then I'm seeing these things on film, I don't really get scared in horror movies anymore, and gore doesn't really bother me because I'm wondering like, oh, how did they do that? Like if somebody on the set with latex and fake blood was doing this. But then you watch these stunts and you're like, oh my God, was that for real? Was that a real dude who just took that landing like in Action USA, falling from the helicopter into the river? Like it really was a real person. Mm-hmm. So, and same with, I guess, pro wrestling is the more you know about it, the more art and skill that you see in what they do, though you're constantly watching out for, oh my God, what just happened for real? Because there's always something that happens for real, mistake or otherwise. Yeah. And I guess that if a game can do that, I bragged on this video game before, and I should get like sponsorship money from them or something like that, since I keep bragging on them. But that game, Darkest Dungeon, I think for me gets that balance right, where it's set up like a traditional dungeon crawler and you're fighting these things that seem at first like, a darker aesthetic version of stuff you might see out of D&D. But then they start getting weirder and a little bit more off in that Lovecraftian way, and then sometimes just flat out you have no idea what you're really dealing with or what it can do to you. And so kind of within the framework, it starts glitching out on you and really freaking me out. So I don't know. I guess I like that balance of both. I don't want to know everything about the monster, but you're right in that there's an appeal to knowing the mechanics behind it too.
Yeah. And then, in talking about like fantasy versus sci-fi monsters, I think, if we go back, I don't know, that's an interesting kind of way that games, especially Dungeons and Dragons and other games, right, like take certain things. I guess it all comes back to origins and where they came from and stuff, because like, a lot of the creatures in Dungeons and Dragons, of course, now a lot have been originally created and they're made up, but a lot were, came from mythology. And, so like if we go back to like fantasy monsters, like, like a dragon or, the Cerberus or whatever, you go back to, the Hydra, things from mythology or, old stories like that. Of course, those are kind of separated from sci-fi monsters, because sci-fi monsters tend to be either, spliced together out of DNA, or they're just a creature from a different planet, or a different type of life form or something like that. But it is interesting. I don't know. I'm just thinking about this, but as things get codified in games, right? Like the three-headed dog is just a three-headed dog in Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's not necessarily a mythic creature. It's just there. Either it just appears there on the, in the game and you kill it and move on, or, if you're playing a mythic game, I guess then you could wrap in the myth around it. But, usually it's just like, oh, well, he has a three-headed dog, and it's not like the actual guardian to hell, or whatever, or to the underworld. And so I think maybe what I'm trying to say, if I'm saying anything at all, because I think I'm rambling today a lot, but it seems like a lot of the fantasy creatures or monsters in Dungeons and Dragons and other role-playing games have been separated kind of from the supernatural, or separated from kind of what they were representing originally in the mythology, and almost become kind of like, either natural creatures that we just have to fight, or, a magical creature that was set up as a guardian. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, and is there something in there that you can jump off of? Because I feel like I was rambling.
No, I don't think you are. I think you're getting on. I think you're getting at the same kind of distinction I was seeing. If you bring up this idea of like fantasy myth monsters versus the science fiction, more alien or genetically engineered monster, I think it's the key distinction for me is something like the fantasy mythic monster, for all its advantages, familiarity, or even an appeal to something meaningful, or maybe playing within an epic tradition that you kind of connect to somewhere in the back of the brain. I think those are strengths, but then you have just this utter clarity of what you're dealing with. And so you already have a sense of what it should and should not do, what it's allowed to do and how it's allowed to be killed or not. And there's some safety within those parameters. And then you go up against some space marines going into a derelict ship, and then instead of a three-headed dog, it's a three-headed person coming at you, and you're like, damn, I don't know if this thing is like, is it contagious? Like, what is this thing? Is it going to melt into a goo and then reform as something else? Does it want to drink my blood? Can it even be killed? I don't even really know what this thing is. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of horror is quite appealing to me, I think. But I, if you're right in seeing that the fantasy gaming has kind of been losing out of some of its mythic connections, and it's no longer Cerberus, it's just a dog with three heads, that's quite unfortunate, I think. Then it can only start going toward, satire, I guess. I don't really know. So I hope not. Keep the magic in the monsters, or switch it up in some way to keep
Yeah.
new doors opening. Don't put those poor puppies in a zoo and just make them mundane creatures that you're slaughtering. Even if you have to do the goblin brings his daughter to work day, it's whatever new door you have to open to keep these things intriguing. Save the monsters.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree. And I think I guess maybe the the new Greek setting for Dungeons and Dragons is kind of, they really try to say, hey, it's not just a minotaur, it is the minotaur, right? Like
Oh, I
there
didn't
aren't
even know there's a
Yeah.
new Greek setting for
Yeah,
D&D. I should know that.
yeah. Well, I mean, new. It came out as we're recording about 6 or 8 months ago, I guess, and then I think, and then it might have been more than that. But
Why didn't my students tell me this? They're supposed to
Yeah.
keep me abreast of pop culture, and
Yeah.
they're all nerds. Anyway, that's cool to know. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah. And so, when this will air, it's been out for a while. So I shouldn't have said new, maybe, but it's been out for a while now. And so it tries to get back to some of the heroic and some of the myth, kind of in there. But I think that's kind of what happens, though. I think it's not like a flaw of the game or anything. It's just like the nature of the game, right? Because you just look for challenging monsters and you just kind of throw them in, right? And, and that kind of style of play is easy, especially when you're like, especially when you're working a day job and you have a family and you're just like, oh, we're going to play tonight. Here's a monster. Now fight it. I know how to run mechanics. I know how to run this. But I think that it has been losing some of that at some point. And I don't know, maybe it's just the nature of a board game, right? Like, kind of idea. If you push the tabletop back to its, tabletop RPGs kind of back to its origins in a war game where a cannon represents, a troop in, Napoleon's army or something, a vampire is just a challenge along the way, right? Like you just kill it and then move to the bigger one, the ancient black dragon or whatever is more powerful or whatever. And I hope that's not the case, but it does seem, though, kind of on a larger level, that we are less comfortable with kind of supernatural monsters as kind of maybe as a society or a culture kind of larger, that you have a movie or a book. Well, in books, it's a little different, but maybe, you have a big, budget movie. Occasionally you can do some supernatural stuff and get away with maybe like ghosts or zombies ish, but then zombies are usually not, supernatural zombies. There's some kind of, plague or something like that. So ghosts may be about the kind of the super or extra natural kind of thing that you can kind of get away with. But, having, and I'm thinking of that one Hercules movie where they took out all the mythology, and I think The Rock was in it. The Hercules movie with The Rock.
Yeah, I didn't see that one.
They took out all the mythology and they made it like, like Scooby-Doo or whatever. Like the lizard men were, just guys wearing masks, and the lion wasn't. They took out all the, the supernatural, or like say maybe like Underworld with vampires, where there is no supernatural anything about the vampires. It's just like a blood disease or whatever. And those things kind of, to me, always just leave me like, oh, okay. Like, can't we imagine things, right? Like, can't we use our imagination?
I'm with you on that. I think you're right. Like, I think there's still a market for ghosts, like or demon-like ghosts, or possession films, or these kinds of things, or haunting films. I think maybe because many people are honestly still scared to death of those things. And I think the last survey that came out is more Americans either believe or are open to believing in ghosts than aren't. So it's in the majority still. So I think think maybe that, but you're right. As soon as you get into any other kind of monster, vampire, or werewolf or anything else, it's kind of losing that, except for some small groups and some small groups of weirdos like us, I guess. But there was this classics scholar named Elizabeth Van Diver, who I think maybe in the mid 90s was kind of clarifying this idea. Well, what happened to these myths, these stories, these culturally important stories that, these cultures told to themselves about themselves, kind of thing. And what are ours now if we're going beyond just recasting history and however we want to see it? And she saw it something as, she thinks we know too much about the past, and we know too much about wrong ideas in the past about the way the world was, and we know too much about the past as in, what was likely to have been and what people really were, and if they were heroes and kings, what they were probably actually like. And too much of that to really hold much magic for us. So instead, we've cast all our mythology out, and not in the deep past and the golden era, but in the deep future. And so we have our Dune, or we have our we throw it up into space and the future. I guess Star Wars is a weird exception that kind of seems like science fiction, but is a little bit more fantasy. But I still think that's in that same spirit of casting it up and away and far in the future. And so that's where we can still have our magic. And so maybe we just know too much about what has been and what our ideas about those things were. But in the future or up in space, it's anybody's game, and it could be anything. And that's where the mythic and the epic still might live strong.
Yeah. And I like some of that. I would add the word, we think we know a lot about the past.
We think we know. That's a good correction there. I'm with you.
Yeah. But just to throw that in, but I think there is something to that. I think there is something to this idea that even though a lot of our past is a vast mystery to us, and that we look at it and say, okay, well, we got all this down, so it can't be mythic or epic or anything like that. So we need to go somewhere other. And that's a really interesting idea. And it does lead us into our third kind of topic that we were going to talk about a little bit. We were going to talk about classic monsters versus kind of modern monsters. And so you started mentioning some there, and maybe they kind of go along with my point that it's just, when you have we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and then Universal, of course, was going to launch their monster universe because they own all the classic monsters. And, I haven't seen the movie, but the Mummy starring Tom Cruise did not do well. It kind of crashed and burned. And so there went the Universal Monsters, cinematic universe up in flames, or up in a sandstorm. I don't know if there's a good metaphor there. And
it unraveled. How about
it unraveled? There you go. But that was even better. Yeah, you can tell Josh is definitely a writer on this one. Yeah, so it definitely unraveled after the Mummy crashed at the box office. And but I do think it's a little bit harder to get people to buy into. I know the 99 Mummy did really well because it was almost cast as it's a comedy. If you view it as a serious movie, you're going to be disappointed. It's a comedy. And of course it was up against, the Phantom Menace. So we all had to, the Phantom Menace was all sold out. So we had to see the Mummy, because we were at the theater anyway. So, all the shows of Phantom Menace were sold out. So we had to go see the Mummy. But
the Mummy's not good, but it was better.
It was better than standing outside when all the other showings were full, but it was at least funny, and it didn't take itself too seriously. And then some of the newer movies, though, I think relying on the supernatural too much just doesn't seem to fly kind of in the public consciousness, right? Like if you do a Wolfman movie, it's you can't really do the classic, one with Claude Rains and that, you can't just remake that because, I don't know why. And maybe it's just the filmmakers. I don't know, maybe we need some, somebody else in there making some movies or something. But like, it just seems like they don't go over as well. There'll be a niche kind of market for a werewolf movie here or there. A vampire movie, after a couple big hurrahs in the, the early 90s or whatever, it seems to kind of hard to get those off the ground unless it is a kind of a blood disease kind of thing instead of a supernatural kind of thing.
And I think, I mean, we already mentioned the exception for like ghost possession kind of things like paranormal activity or conjuring. These kinds of things still do well and are quite popular. But I think another exception would be kind of the slasher tradition that really got going in the 70s and then or started in the 70s, was really hot in the 80s. It had some rough patches in the 90s and early 2000s. I think Adam Green and his Hatchet series kind of revived it. Actually, it started as a revival. He just the subtitle for the first Hatchet movie in something like 2006 was something like Old School American Horror, where he was tired of seeing only found footage ghost movies and just what he called torture porn, and he wanted to get back to just slashers. They were funny, but they were gross, but they were kind of cool and scary. But so often, very quickly, that in the franchises, they either start out as supernatural killers or they have to become supernatural killers in order to keep these films going one after another. And I think those, like, everybody's perfectly accepting of a supernatural Jason Voorhees who just keeps coming out of Crystal Lake no matter what you do to him. I think that Victor Crowley in the Hatchet films, he's just flat out an incarnate ghost that just keeps coming back to life every night to kill anyone on his island. And Chucky or Freddy Krueger. I've got issues with Michael Myers, but still, there's no denying that at some point in some timeline threads of his franchise, he definitely became a supernatural creature. But even in the original one, where he was just a man, Dr. Loomis's big point is he's not a man; he's pure evil. As in, like, he might. His form that he's in right now is just a man, but he's really a channel for deep universal evil, and he's just opened himself up to it entirely. So there's no man left there. You are dealing with an abstraction from the underside of the universe, and that's just fascinating to me. And so he's one of those, like, he's one of those. I can't believe I just drew a parallel in my mind to the Shape in Halloween '78 and Jesus Christ, but something like this: 100% man and 100% supernatural simultaneously. I think the slasher films play with that, and I think people are still open to that and willing. And I think they just have a hard time taking vampires, werewolves too seriously. I think we're even past zombies at this point. So I don't know.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Even though I grew up in the 80s and stuff, I was never a big fan of the slasher movies. And of course, they were all around me. And, I've ended up seeing some, of course, and that I was just never just a huge fan of those. I found myself always kind of going back to the classic Universal ones, to the Wolfman and to Frankenstein and to Dracula and to some of those movies back, from the, really starting in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. 60s gets a little weird, right? Things start getting weird in the 60s. The Hammer films kind of come in and that, but the Universal kind of movies, the classic monsters even kind of had a falling out in the 60s, really. And then, and I just find, I don't know, this is a side point, but I do find some of the practical matters just a little bit funny sometimes when you're talking about film, because I've studied film history, and it's just like, in the 70s, it's like, oh, why did you make this slasher movie? And they're like, well, you just need a person with a mask on and a knife in his hand, and then like some 18-year-olds or college students who you could give like lunch, and they'll hang around you for 3 weeks while we shoot this movie or whatever.
Just cheap and easy to make.
And so they were cheap and they were easy, and then they had, even if even if some of those movies, right, like it goes to a theater and you're like, oh, well, it made $4 million. Well, you probably didn't even spend $100,000 on the thing. Right. So that's a huge return on your investment. So I always found some of that interesting, that how the practical, monetary and budgetary concerns, kind of fed into some of these trends in movies. I always find that kind of fascinating. But so I don't really understand the appeal, but I think you're right. It's like we want it to be non-supernatural, but supernatural too, right? Like we don't want it to be, oh, well, there was a curse placed on somebody years ago and now they're a wolfman, and if they bite you, you become a wolf or something. But once if your first movie was made in 1974 and you're going to make the 20th sequel in 2022, you're going to have to say that person is supernatural, right? Or something along those lines, or I think that was a critique of the newer Halloween movie. And it's just like, well, you're obviously dealing with a man in his late 70s. You could probably just trip him and then you'd be okay. Right. Like, but it's not that, right? So it has to be something else. So we're kind of balancing. We want the scare of the unstoppable supernatural, but without all the, I guess, other trappings of the supernatural that kind of come along with it, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and I have a lot of opinions about the various Halloween movies and the new ones too, and I'm afraid if I get too deep into that, then I'll talk you into a corner for the next hour or two, because I've found myself in recent years becoming a very, very obsessed and highly opinionated Halloween fan, and that just does not mean I accept all the films, but I think some of them did stuff right. But yeah, you're right. How do you keep it going? You could do what they've done in the Halloween franchise, and I'm still curious. Maybe you can help me figure out if there's any other franchise that did this, in which various sequels denied the real world existence of select movies that came before, select predecessors, and so the Halloween 2018, how do you keep Michael Myers after, what is that, the 12th Halloween movie or something like that? Well,
yeah, I lost track somewhere.
Yeah, they just decided that the only one that ever actually existed was the original 1978, and everything else was just urban myth. Yeah. But Halloween H2O recognized the first and second, but not any of the others. And then there were different kinds of, or just total reboots or whatever. But that you're right. In Halloween Kills, he just goes, he's just full on supernatural. He's just doing impossible things. He's full on supernatural. And you have to do that. And I think it's a good slasher franchise. It eventually just embraces that, or embraced it from the beginning. Again, I think I can't speak highly enough of, if you want to see just good old American horror slasher that doesn't take itself seriously and still does what you need it to do, I think the Hatchet franchise is that. They also get the amazing Kane Hodder to play the killer, who was the best of the Jason Voorhees too. So, and there's just tons of classic slasher film shout outs through that whole series. So it's just fantastic. But anyways, I think it kind of appeals to people who are still afraid of the intruder in the house who's going to kill them, or the person hiding in the back seat in your car when you're going, getting in your car in the dark. I think that's appealing to that. But it also has this appeal of you can still have this unstoppable force of evil, and maybe you don't know all its rules, like unlike a vampire or a werewolf, right? I have a vampire slaying kit that I'm pretty sure is about 90% complete and accurate, and a vampire would have a hard time. I guess this would be the worst house in this town that I live in for a vampire to break in, because I've got this thing's number. But I don't have a Michael Myers or slash The Shape slaying kit. I don't have a Jason Voorhees slaying kit. In fact, I don't know what I would do, and running clearly doesn't work either. So I'm screwed. And I think there's some appeal of that too, which I guess kind of circles us back to what I was saying intrigues me about monsters and role-playing games is you're right. It is intriguing to kind of know what you're up against and have that excitement. But I also like this not really knowing how to deal with it or what it even really is. That's still intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, talking about the unstoppable force of evil, of course, I had to be reminded of a science fiction monster we didn't touch on, but the Terminator, right? It's the one thing, I think the kind of the one thing about machines that terrifies us, right, is the single-mindedness, right? I was programmed to do this, and there is no deviation, right? That where a person, something happens, a person's mind could be changed or realize they're doing something wrong and stop. But like the terror that is held within the machine is just, exterminate, X person or exterminate human race. And there is no bargaining with that. There is no, convincing it. It is just kind of onwards, unstoppable and undeviatable. It cannot be deviated from its course. It is just going to accomplish that mission. And I think that's one thing about machines that terrify us. I think even about self-driving cars, right? That, that it's just that, even though a person, right, is going to make probably 1,000 more mistakes than a self-driving car will. I want a person behind the wheel if my 3-year-old walks into the street, right? Because a person is going to have a very different reaction than a car that's programmed to just go in a straight line, right?
Yeah, when they were getting really serious about these self-driving cars, just like every new thing that comes out, I'm like, have you guys not watched Maximum Overdrive? Do you not know what happens eventually if we keep this up?
Yeah.
And you're right with the Terminator, which the original Terminator is it's a perfect horror film. It's absolutely fantastic.
It's perfect.
And I think a close viewing of Halloween 2 shows you that's where Terminator came from. Cameron, I'm not sure Cameron has or will ever admit to this, but it's his take on Halloween 2, even though that's where the Shape actor gets all even more robotic and Gollum-like, and they recreate Halloween 2 down to the bizarrest little details. And so I do think the Shape invented the Terminator as well in his own way. But that I might be the only person who thinks that, but I still think I'm right, so it doesn't matter. But I don't have to make everything about. And I normally in this household make everything comes back to RoboCop somehow. But RoboCop, at least Verhoeven said that he was inspired by Terminator. I'm convinced Terminator is inspired by The Shape, Halloween, and so everything now comes back to The Shape and Halloween for me.
Well, this is totally random, and I've had you on way too long already, but you just brought
oh my god,
something.
It has been whoa.
I know, we're way over time. So and I just had a random thought, like you were saying that I don't know Halloween 2 well enough to even talk, but that's interesting because I love Terminator. And but I think just watching interviews and reading about movies and that, I think you can possibly trace like most fantasy kind of like with a bit of adventure-y movies all the way back to King Kong. I think like King Kong was like, if there was no King Kong, there'd be no Jurassic Park. There would be no, like some of these movies, there'd be no Indiana Jones. There'd be, King Kong, like, and I'm saying this for a couple of reasons. I think culturally, sure, like we get kind of the idea of King Kong in our culture, but also from a filmmaking standpoint, that anytime I'm listening to somebody who makes a monster movie or a creature movie, whether it's aliens or whether it's new ones, they're always saying, like, well, I was inspired by this movie, or I was inspired by the work of these people. And like, if you follow the chain, sometimes it's just one link, but sometimes it's a couple links. They all goes back to King Kong. And I just think that's fascinating. I
think you might be right about that, because I mean, the deeper you dive into like what are the big shapes of the story of King Kong, the more universal story it is, and this kind of like and how well it's done poetically, almost kind of like the dramas of Thebes, or some of the ancient Greek stories in which you have like two islands to compare, Skull Island and Manhattan, Island of Manhattan, and you go from one island to another and you see which one is the most savage, and it's just, so even at the basic level, it's just a beautiful and masterful tale.
Yeah, absolutely. And it still fires our imagination today with like tons of remakes and all of that. I don't know. Well, hopefully we have talked enough. I don't know about some of these ideas. I really think it is interesting, the way that we can take some of these things. And I'm always thinking about fantasy versus science fiction. And I don't know, I really liked your point that you made about like, we have to put the epic stuff out in space, or somewhere else. And that is an interesting point, because part of me thinks we're draining the supernatural out of a lot of our movies, and it's kind of fallen out of flavor, except for Ghosts, as we mentioned. And then but so we kind of have to reinvent them, right? We have to reinvent them through almost like a scientific means, right? We have to use DNA to create the dinosaurs. We have to have computers invent the Terminator. We have to have the aliens are just creatures from a different planet, right? And I don't know, it's just all kind of really fascinating stuff, and I love how we can play with it in stories and games. I mean, there's just tons of stuff there. So anyway, Josh, before I let you go, why don't you tell everybody, or remind them, since you've been on the podcast now like 5 times, remind them what you do and where they can listen to the Monster Professor, and remind us that you write books and all of that stuff.
Well, and thanks again for the shout out or the shameless plug moment. The podcast, I have a podcast. It's called The Monster Professor, and you can find that anywhere that podcast exists, including YouTube if you want. And we discuss and explore monsters and literature, myth, film, games, folklore, culture, and beyond. And very often I get to talk with cool monster experts, often monster experts in the scholarly world, so monster scholars, believe it or not, that's a thing, but also all sorts of other interesting folks who have really cool things to say about monsters, including Matt Davids himself on a couple episodes. And also joshwoodsauthor.com is a site where you can see some of my other projects, such as my books. I've got some fiction, working on some nonfiction stuff, stories, essays. Check it out if you're a monster geek. And as I think many of you listening to the show are, because you spend much of your life playing with monsters, and I think you're on the right path, because I think we all should have more monsters in our lives.
Well, thanks, Josh. And I will be sure to put links to your podcast and to your books in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who's listening right now can head over there and you can listen to the Monster Professor, of which I was probably the worst guest, I am sure, because Josh has some amazing people on the show. Scholars of the highest rank actually have been on the Monster Professor, which is incredible. So I urge you to check that out. Well, Josh, thank you for coming back again. Obviously, we'll do it again in a few months or a year or whatever it is, whenever we can make our schedules work, because I love talking about all of this stuff and some great knowledge, some great movie trivia along the way, a lot of cool stuff about monsters. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Once again, it's been a huge pleasure and a huge honor as always. A lot of fun. So thank you again.
All right, there you have it, guys. Oh my goodness, I could talk to the Monster Professor all day, as evidenced by the fact that these episodes usually go really, really long. I really appreciate it when Josh is able to stop by the podcast and we are able to talk about awesome and cool monsters, and I really hope you guys appreciate our discussions as well. As I mentioned in the show notes, you can find links to Josh's books and more information about what he does. That is at dicegeeks.com. All right. Now, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You get 10 free. No, I keep saying that. I said it for so long. You get 20 free dungeon maps, a custom character background, and even more than that, some other little PDFs you can use in your games. Also, you'll never miss an episode of this show, and each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in the wild world of Dice Geeks. All right, guys, I really appreciate you listening to the show. If you would like to support the show financially, you can do so at patreon.com/dicegeeks. That would be greatly, greatly appreciated. And as always, I thank you so much for listening. And until next Wednesday, keep gaming!